I'm going to tell you something that most people in my life still don't know the full truth about. Not because I'm protecting myself anymore. That ship sailed a long time ago. I'm telling it now because I've been sitting with it for 4 years, and the weight of a secret doesn't go away just because you get used to carrying it. It just becomes part of how you walk. So, here it is, all of it. 4 years ago, I made a decision in about 6 seconds that cost me nearly everything I had. My marriage, my savings, my brother's freedom almost, and a man I'd never met nearly died on a wet road at 11:30 at night because of a chain of choices that started with something so mundane I'm almost embarrassed to say it out loud. I let my car registration lapse, not the insurance. Well, that too, eventually. But it started with a registration sticker I kept meaning to renew and kept finding reasons not to. $17. That's what the renewal cost. $17 and maybe 20 minutes online. And I kept not doing it for 6 weeks because we were behind on the electric bill and behind on Mia's credit card. And I had this stupid mental trick I'd been doing my whole adult life, where I'd sort expenses into critical and almost critical. And I kept bumping the registration to almost critical, week after week, telling myself I'd get to it when things leveled out. Things don't level out. That's the thing nobody tells you when you're young. There is no level, there's just the next thing coming. My name is Cal. I'm 38 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in a city I'm not going to name, and I work in logistics, which is a boring job I'm grateful for every single day because for a while I wasn't sure I'd still have it. And this is the story of the worst year of my life. To understand what happened, you have to understand Tommy. Tommy is 3 years younger than me, which puts him at 35 now, and for as long as I can remember, he has been the kind of person who makes everything look effortless even when it's actively on fire. He's got this quality, I don't know what else to call it, where he walks into a room and somehow the room reorganizes itself around him. People like him immediately, always have. Our mother used to say he could charm a speeding ticket out of a state trooper, and honestly, based on available evidence, she wasn't wrong. The flip side of that is that Tommy had never really developed whatever muscle it is that makes you stop and think about consequences. Not because he was stupid, he wasn't. He was smart in ways that used to make me jealous when we were kids. But intelligence without friction just makes you faster at getting into trouble. By the time Tommy was in his early 30s, the trouble was significant. He'd had 2 DUIs. One was quietly handled. Our uncle knew someone, paperwork got lost, don't ask. The second one was handled less quietly, and resulted in a suspended license and a fine and a probationary period that he treated more as a suggestion than a requirement. There was also a thing with a business partner that I still don't fully understand, involving money that moved in directions it shouldn't have. And Tommy's name had been on some documents that made his lawyer very tired and very expensive. He wasn't a bad person, I want to be clear about that. He wasn't malicious. He just had this absolute genius for standing at the edge of a cliff and convincing himself it wasn't that far down. And I was always the one standing a few feet back, watching, telling him to be careful, and then helping him up when he fell anyway. That was us. That was 20-some years of us. The night that changed everything, Tommy called me at around 7. I was eating leftover pasta at the kitchen counter, half watching something on my laptop, and Mia was in the other room on a work call that had run long. We'd been fighting that week, not yelling. Just the quiet kind of fighting that married people do when they're both too tired to actually argue and instead just sort of drift past each other without making contact. "I need a favor," Tommy said, which is how about 60% of his calls started. "What kind of favor?" "I need a ride, my car's in the shop." A pause. "And I need to talk to you about something." The something, I figured, was money. It was usually money. "How far?" 20 minutes maybe, I'm at Decker's." Decker's was a bar we'd been going to since our mid-20s. Neighborhood place. Dark wood, weak lighting, bartender named Phil who remembered your order after the second visit. I hadn't been in a while. "Give me an hour," I said. I told Mia I was going to meet Tommy. She came out of the bedroom with her phone still in her hand, still half in the work call, and she looked at me with that expression I'd learned to read over 6 years of marriage, the one that wasn't quite disapproval but was definitely adjacent to it. "How long?" she said. "Couple hours, I'll text." She nodded, went back to the bedroom. The door didn't close hard exactly, just firmly. There's a difference. I found him in the back corner of Decker's, which was where he always sat when he wanted to not be overheard. He had a beer in front of him that he hadn't touched much. That was my first sign that this was serious. Tommy drank socially the way other people breathed, automatic, unthinking. When he wasn't drinking, something was wrong. I sat down. He looked at me. Okay, I said. What? He turned the beer bottle in a slow circle on the table. You remember Danny Ruiz from the Crestfield thing? The business thing, the documents thing. Yeah, he's talking to someone. Somebody who's interested in whatever Danny says he has. What does Danny say he has? Tommy looked up. Enough. I sat back. The bar noise, pool cues, jukebox, the low murmur of other people's conversations seemed to get slightly more distant. How bad? I said. Depends on whether Danny's bluffing. He finally took a sip of the beer, and Danny's a pretty good bluffer. What followed was about 2 hours of Tommy explaining, in that careful sideways way he had of explaining bad things, exactly how exposed he was. I'm not going to lay out all the details because some of them are still legally sensitive, and also because honestly some of it I still don't fully understand. What I understood was this. If Danny Ruiz took what he had to the right people, Tommy was looking at charges, real ones, not a DUI, not a registration issue, charges that could mean actual prison time. Okay, I said when he'd finished. What does your lawyer say? My lawyer says I need to stay clean, nothing new, nothing that gives anybody a reason to look harder at me. Then stay clean. I am staying clean. He said it a little too quickly. Tommy, I am. He pushed the beer away. I needed to tell somebody, I needed somebody to know in case. He stopped. In case what? He shrugged, but it wasn't a casual shrug. It was the shrug of someone who'd been thinking about worst-case scenarios. I looked at my brother across the sticky bar table and felt that thing I always felt with him. This complicated mixture of love and exhaustion and something that was almost grief. For the version of him I kept hoping would show up permanently and kept only showing up in glimpses. Nothing's going to happen, I said. You're going to be fine. Yeah, he picked up the beer again. Yeah, probably. We sat there for another half hour talking about other things, easier things, his apartment, my job. A thing our cousin had said at Christmas that we both still found funny, normal stuff, brother stuff. Around 11, I told him I had to get home. I'll walk you out, he said. The rain had started while we were inside. Not a drizzle, a real rain, the kind that comes in sideways and immediately soaks through a jacket. We stood under the bar's awning for a minute, watching it come down. You parked around the corner? He asked. Yeah. We jogged to the car. Got in, I started it and turned the heat up and sat there for a second letting the windows start to defog. My phone lit up on the dashboard mount. Mia. I looked at the call, looked at the rain on the windshield. We'd been mid-fight, and I didn't want to start that conversation driving, especially not in this weather. And I reached for the phone to let it go to voicemail and call her back when I parked. And in that 10-second window of distraction, Tommy said, I got it, and was somehow already out the passenger door and around the front of the car. Tommy, what are you? You shouldn't be on your phone and driving. He opened the driver's door and was grinning at me through the rain. Scoot over. Tommy, your license is suspended. It's 4 blocks. Nobody's out in this. Get back in the car. Cal, he put his hand on the door frame. The rain was soaking his shirt. 4 blocks, you can call her back. Just scoot over. Looking back, I can trace the exact geometry of how I didn't stop it. My phone was ringing. The rain was loud. Tommy was already half in the door. I'd had 2 beers over 2 hours, not enough to matter, but enough to make my reaction time about half a beat slow. And there was this thing I'd spent my whole life doing with Tommy, this terrible habit, choosing the easier thing right now and trusting that it would probably be fine. I slid over to the passenger seat. He took the wheel. I answered the phone. Mia was talking before I even got out a word. Something about whether I'd paid the electric bill online or just thought about paying it, because she was looking at the account and it showed. And then the sound. I can describe it and you still won't know what it was like. It was heavy. That's the only word. Like something heavy interrupting something that had been in motion, a compression of force that I felt in my chest before I understood it in my brain. Tommy whispered something. I don't even know if it was a word. The car had stopped. I don't remember him braking. It had just stopped. I looked through the windshield. The rain was streaking down the glass and the headlights were on, and in the headlights there was a person on the ground. Not moving. I got out. I don't remember opening the door. I was just out in the rain on the road, and the person was a man, maybe 40, in a dark jacket. And he was breathing. I could see his chest moving, but he wasn't conscious, and there was blood near his head catching the light in a way that made my legs go strange. I called 911. The dispatcher picked up in 2 rings, and I told her the intersection and that a person had been hit, and that they were breathing but unconscious. And she told me not to move him. And I said okay. And I crouched there in the rain next to a stranger saying things like, "You're okay? Help is coming," into the dark in a voice that didn't feel like mine. Behind me, Tommy had gotten out of the car. I could hear him. The sound he was making, I don't have a clean comparison for it. Like someone trying to hold themselves together by not making any sound and failing. The sirens started maybe 2 minutes later, and that was when Tommy grabbed my arm. "Cal," his face in the headlights, the rain on it. He looked nothing like the person who'd been grinning at me through the car door 10 minutes ago. "Cal, listen to me. Tommy, listen." His hands were shaking. I could feel it through his grip on my arm. "If the police find out I was driving the Crestfield thing, everything with Danny, it doesn't matter what I say. They will find a reason to make it worse. They will. Stop. I'm not asking you to lie forever. I'm just for tonight." His voice broke. He looked at the man on the ground and then back at me, and his eyes were red. "Not from the rain. Tell them you were driving. I will fix everything, I swear to you. I will deal with it. I will come forward, just not tonight, Cal, please. Please." The sirens were close. He was my brother. He was terrified. He was asking me to do something I knew clearly and completely was wrong. The police cruiser's lights came around the corner. I made the worst decision of my life. "Get back in the passenger side," I said. The officers were professional. They were calm. They took my statement the way they took statements, systematically, without visible judgment, asking the same questions a few different ways to see if the answers stayed consistent. They stayed consistent. I was practiced at keeping things consistent. I'd had my whole life with Tommy to develop that particular skill. What I didn't find out until later, was that the registration issue and the lapsed insurance had all lapsed together. I'd renewed the registration online 4 weeks earlier, or thought I had. There'd been an error in the payment processing I hadn't caught, and the renewal hadn't gone through. The insurance I hadn't checked on in 2 months. When the officer ran the plates, what came back was a picture of someone who was driving an unregistered, uninsured vehicle and had just injured a pedestrian. The officer who told me had the face of someone explaining a complicated medical diagnosis. Professional, matter-of-fact, not unkind. I stood in the rain and heard the words and nodded at appropriate intervals. Tommy was standing off to the side. I didn't look at him. If I had looked at him, I think something in my face would have changed, and I couldn't afford that. The man we'd hit was taken away in an ambulance. The officer told me they'd need me to come in for further questioning in the next 24 hours. He gave me a card. I drove home. Tommy sat in the passenger seat and said nothing. When I pulled up outside his place, he started to say something, and I held up my hand, and he stopped. "Go inside," I said. He went. I sat in the parked car for a while and listened to the rain slow down and tried to figure out what I'd just done. She was awake when I got home. Of course she was. She was sitting on the couch with the TV on mute, and when I came through the door and she saw my face, she stood up slowly the way you stand up when you're bracing yourself. I told her there'd been an accident, that a pedestrian had been hit, that the man was in the hospital. I told her I'd been driving. She went still. Then she came across the room and put her arms around me, and she didn't ask questions, not right then. She just held on, and I stood there in my wet jacket and let her, and felt like the worst version of myself had fully taken the wheel. The next morning we found out who the man was. His name was Marcus Webb, 41 years old. A teacher, middle school science, which I know because it was in the second paragraph of every news article that ran his name. He had 2 kids, both under 10. He was in a coma. Mia found out before I did. She came into the kitchen where I was on the phone with my insurance company, already understanding how bad that was going to be. And she set her phone down on the counter with the screen facing up, and on the screen was a photo. A family photo. A man and a woman and 2 little kids on a beach somewhere. I looked at it for a long time. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. That silence between us, that was maybe the first brick in a wall that eventually got too tall to see over. The story ran locally first, then got picked up. Uninsured driver. Pedestrian in critical condition. My name was public within 48 hours. I don't know exactly how, but these things move fast when the victim is a well-liked schoolteacher, and the driver had a paper trail of registration and insurance issues. The comments online were something I made the mistake of reading exactly once. After that, Mia hid my phone for a day, which I let her do because I didn't trust myself with it. My employer called. The conversation was not comfortable. I still had my job at the end of it, but just barely, and only because a woman named Hartley in HR went to bat for me in a way I've never fully repaid and probably can't. Tommy called 4 times in the first 2 days. I let them all go to voicemail. On the 4th one, he didn't say much, just, "I'm going to fix this, Cal, I promise I'm going to fix this." I didn't call back. Mia's parents called. Her mother was the kind of woman who had strong opinions about fault and responsibility and delivered them in complete, well-organized sentences. The call lasted 26 minutes. I sat at the kitchen table and held the phone and said yes, and I understand, and I know in the appropriate places. After she hung up, Mia looked at me from across the table. "What are you going to do?" she said. "Handle it? How?" I didn't have an answer for that, which was itself an answer. His name was Forsyth. He came recommended by a guy at my job, someone who'd used him for a property dispute. Forsyth was in his mid-50s, kept a clean office, wore nice ties. He looked at my situation with the air of someone doing math in his head that wasn't adding up. "The liability exposure here is significant," he said, which was his polished way of saying. "You're in trouble." He went through the details. Uninsured, at fault, serious bodily injury, victim with dependents and a stable career, and a sympathetic public profile. The civil suit, when it came, would be substantial. My assets were not substantial. There was a gap. "There are things we can do," he said. "But I want to be clear with you, we're not looking at a situation where you walk away clean. We're looking at damage limitation." I nodded. I'd already figured that out. What I hadn't figured out was that Forsyth, over the next several weeks, was doing his own math that had nothing to do with representing me well. I found out later, too much later, that he had a prior professional relationship with the attorney representing the Webb family. Not a partnership, nothing provable as outright misconduct, but conversations, information sharing. Things I told Forsyth in confidence showed up on the other side of the table in ways that were hard to explain as coincidence. The moment I realized it, I was sitting in Forsyth's office listening to him explain why he thought I should consider a settlement offer that my gut was telling me was wrong. And I watched his eyes move to a spot just past my shoulder when I asked why, and something clicked. I fired him that afternoon. Found a new attorney, a woman named Park, who was younger and sharper and had the permanent expression of someone who had heard every story and been impressed by none of them. She looked at my case, looked at Forsyth's handling of it, and said the word interesting in a way that meant several other things. "How much did he know?" she said. "Everything I told him." "And what did you tell him?" I thought about Tommy. About that night, about the question I'd been circling for months. "I told him what I decided to tell him," I said. She looked at me. "Okay," she said. "We'll work with that." 10 weeks after the accident, Marcus Webb came out of the coma. I found out through Park, who heard from the other side's attorney, who was now operating in the strange, formal courtesy that opposing attorneys have once they know they're going to be dealing with each other for a while. He's conscious. He's responsive. Prognosis is still uncertain for full recovery, but he's awake. I sat with that information for a while. I didn't know how to feel about it. Relieved, obviously, some relief, the weight of maybe having caused a death lifting slightly. But also something more complicated. Because Marcus Webb being awake meant Marcus Webb could talk. And Marcus Webb had been conscious in the moments before the car hit him. He might have seen the driver. Park called me 4 days later. "We need to meet," she said. "Today if possible." I drove to her office. She was standing when I came in, which she didn't usually do. She gestured at the chair and then sat across from me and laced her hands on the desk. "Marcus Webb gave a statement," she said. "He describes the driver as a male in his early to mid-30s, dark hair. A tattoo visible on the left side of the neck, extending below the collar." The room didn't change. The light didn't shift. I just sat very still. Tommy has a tattoo on the left side of his neck. Has had it since he was 23. A small compass rose, just below the jaw. He wore collared shirts to job interviews and family Christmases and anywhere the situation called for it. But in a regular t-shirt or a rain-soaked jacket on a dark street, you could see it clearly. "Cal," Park said. She was watching me carefully. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I looked at the window behind her, the city outside going about its day indifferent. I thought about Tommy, about the probation, the Crestfield thing, Danny Ruiz and whatever he had, the domino effect of Tommy getting charged right now. The promise Tommy had made me, "I'll fix this, I'll come forward," that I still hadn't heard him keep. And I thought about Marcus Webb, lying in that hospital, his kids in that beach photo, the 10 weeks I'd spent carrying the wrong name. "Yes," I said, and I told Park everything. She advised me to get ahead of it. Go to the police proactively with her present, before the investigation ran the description and found Tommy on their own. Which they would. It was only a matter of time. Better to control it than to have it controlled. I called Tommy the night before we were going in. He picked up on the second ring, first time he'd picked up in 3 weeks. "Cal," he said. He knew from my voice, I think. He probably knew before I said anything. They have a description, I said. From Marcus, it matches you. A long silence. Okay, he said finally, quiet. I'm going in tomorrow with my attorney. I'm telling them the truth. Another silence, longer. Tommy, I know. His voice was strange, stripped down, like the usual performance of Tommy. The ease, the grin, the charm had just been switched off. I know, Cal, I know. I'm sorry I waited this long. Don't, he stopped. Started again. Don't apologize to me. You don't get to apologize to me. Okay. Is there anything, he stopped again, I heard him exhale. Is there anything I can do? Come in with me, voluntarily. Park says it matters. The silence this time was the longest one. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll be there. He was there. Standing outside Park's building at 8:15 the next morning, hands in his jacket pockets, looking like he hadn't slept. We didn't say much in the elevator. There wasn't a lot to say. He told the truth. His attorney, a guy named Desai who Park called competent, if expensive, was with him, and Tommy sat across the table from two detectives and told them exactly what had happened. He didn't look at me while he talked. I didn't look at him. We both looked at some neutral middle distance and let it all be said. What happened legally is complicated, and I'm not going to walk through all of it because some of it is still ongoing and some of it is genuinely too boring to narrate. The short version, Tommy faced charges. The suspended license, the at-fault accident, the injury. The Crestfield thing got its own separate lane. His attorney worked it hard, and some things went better than expected, and some things went worse, and Tommy spent 8 months in minimum security and has been on probation for a year and a half since. I faced the civil suit with Park and without Forsyth, and with a much cleaner conscience, which counts for something even when it doesn't count for money. The settlement cleaned me out in ways I'm still recovering from. I sold my car and took the bus for a year. I moved into a smaller place. I ate a lot of beans and rice and tried to think of it as a dietary choice rather than a financial one. Mia, here's where it gets harder. The accident didn't end our marriage. We survived the accident. What the accident did was strip away the background noise that had been covering some things up, and what we found underneath wasn't a marriage that needed saving. It was a marriage that had already been quietly over for about a year and a half that we'd both been too busy, too scared, too proud to admit. We talked about it, finally, properly, in the kitchen one evening about 6 months after the accident. Not fighting, just talking. Mia poured 2 glasses of wine and we sat across from each other and said the things we'd been not saying for 2 years. I think I've been lonely for a while, she said. I didn't argue. I'd been lonely too. We'd been lonely in the same house, which is its own specific kind of sad. The divorce was civil. Nobody was the villain. We divided things fairly and cried a little and occasionally still go for coffee, which sounds impossible but is just the truth of 2 people who were important to each other for a long time and are trying to figure out what that looks like now. I'm not over it. I don't think you get over a marriage the way you get over a cold. I think it just becomes a part of your story and you keep telling the story, and eventually the sore place around it stops being so raw. Marcus Webb, last I heard, had recovered more fully than the early prognosis suggested. He's back teaching. Not full-time yet, some lasting effects that I won't detail because they're his to tell, not mine. His attorney made sure I was aware of everything, which I think was intentional and which I think was fair. I've written him 2 letters, never sent either of them. I keep trying to find the right words for what I did and what I didn't do and what I should have done, and so far the right words haven't come. Maybe they will. Maybe some things don't get the right words and you just have to do whatever small amount of good you can do in the space where the words should be. Tommy got out 8 months ago. He looks different. Quieter in a way that doesn't feel like something was taken away, but more like something settled. We have dinner about once a month, the 2 of us. He's working for a contractor up north, doing honest work, paying back debts in small increments. He doesn't grin his way through hard conversations anymore. Last month, over tacos at a place near his apartment, he said, I think about Webb's kids. Yeah, I said. I keep thinking about what their year was like, you know, while he was in the hospital. I know. He was quiet for a minute, turning a water glass in circles on the table. Same gesture, different bar, different year. I'm going to write him, he said. Okay, I don't know what I'll say. Write it anyway, I said. Send it anyway, you don't have to have the right words. He nodded. We finished our tacos. I paid because he's still rebuilding and I'm further along than he is, and that's just how it is. On the drive home, I sat at a red light and watched the rain coming down, the ordinary kind, not dramatic, just a Tuesday night in October, and I thought about all the pivot points in that story. The registration I didn't pay, the license I didn't check on, The night I slid over to the passenger seat. The weeks I carried a lie that wasn't mine to carry. The room where I finally put it down. I used to think the mistakes were the story. I used to turn them over and over, trying to find the one that was the real one, the root of it, the thing I could point to and say, there, that's where it went wrong if I'd just done that differently. But I don't think there was one moment. I think it was an accumulation of small habits, small deferrals, things I'd been meaning to get to, conversations I'd been meaning to have, truths I'd been meaning to tell myself. The accident didn't create any of that. It just made it impossible to look away from. I'm 38 now. I live alone, but I'm not lonely, which feels like a meaningful distinction. I have my job and 2 close friends and a therapist I see every other Wednesday who has heard all of this in much longer form and is still, improbably, optimistic about me. I still drive. Of course I still drive. Every car I've had since that night, I check the registration myself. Physically, I look at the sticker, and I check the insurance documents online, and I do it when it's due, not 3 weeks after it's due, not when I get around to it. Not because I think ritual prevents disaster. I know better than that. Because some lessons you earn the hard way and then you keep them. That's all I've got. If you read this whole thing, thank you for listening. I hope whatever you're carrying tonight feels a little lighter than it did this morning. It doesn't always get lighter, but sometimes it does. And sometimes that's enough to keep going.